Hello fellow cinephiles, 90s Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm looking at a film that came out in '95, and not a spectacular film, but a film I don't mind. Johnny Mnemonic. This was directed by Robert Lango and was based on a short story written by sci-fi writer William Gibson, who would go on to write Necromancer, and ultimately served as screenwriter for this film as well. It was made for a budget of 26 to 30 million, but only went on to make 19 million at the box office. So it's another example of a film that didn't do real well in the 90s. But I wouldn't say this is a cult classic per se. I'm sure it does have an audience out there who do enjoy and like the film, but it's definitely not in that cult classic sort of realm that we usually see films like this in. It had an interesting cast: Keanu Reeves, Dina Myers, Ice-T, Udo Kerr, Henry Rollins, Takeshi Kitano, who's cool in it. And it's visually kind of interesting. Some of the visual effects are very dated, especially when you go into a particular scene where Johnny's making a phone call in the digital world, and it just doesn't hold up. And there are some great concepts and ideas in this film. It just doesn't accomplish what it sets out to be, and it isn't the film the filmmakers wanted it to be, which is really sad because there was a lot of meddling behind the scenes with producers and such. So just a little bit about the film. For those who haven't seen it, this is what the story is about. The film is set in 2021, portrays a dystopian future racked by tech-induced plague, awash with conspiracies and dominated by mega corporations and organised crime. Keanu Reeves plays Johnny Mnemonic, a data courier with an overloaded brain implant designed to securely store confidential information. And the information he has is what everybody seems to want, and throws him into this world and situation that he struggles to understand, comprehend and deal with. In some ways, this film reminds me of John Carpenter's Escape from New York in LA. More in, not so much in its story, but much more in world creation, end of the world and how the world has changed type concept. Now this is a bit more slicker, especially when we're in the cities that look really flash and interesting, and then we're on the outskirts of town or other areas within the world. It's very dingy and dark and grimy, and kind of reminds you of like these sort of apocalyptic sort of world films. But it's sort of an interesting contrast between the two, which I liked. Like I mentioned, all the actors were good. Originally, apparently, it was meant to be Val Kilmer was meant to play the lead, Johnny Mnemonic, but he passed on it and ultimately went to Keanu Reeves, who a lot of people say is robotic and stoic, and that's kind of what they wanted him to be in this film, and he struggled with that a little bit. But I kind of like the performance that he does give. And he's a character you kind of like. He's a little bit dickish, but overall, he's an interesting character. Apparently, Robert Longo and William Gibson ultimately came up with the script and the ideas in 1989 and struggled to find financing for the film. No one really wanted to do it. They came up with the idea they wanted to do it for a half and try and do it sort of like an art film, but they just couldn't find the funding, and no studio was really interested. Warner Brothers were at one stage, but were involved in some things and passed on the project. It wasn't until we got into the 90s when the sort of internet came about and cyberpunk kind of concept came around, and this is when producers felt they could really take advantage of the concepts within this movie and sort of put it out, and so began filming. You know, at a $30 million budget, and it was shot in Canada, which was Keanu Reeves was from, of course, and they just sort of started to do this film, and the studio continually to meddle within the movie they wanted to make, which is usual, unfortunately. And it's sad that these things happen because I feel like this was a really great concept, and I just wish it was more like what the filmmakers wanted it to be originally. The casting of Keanu Reeves I felt was kind of interesting in a way. He'd had success obviously previous with Point Break, and Speed came out a year before this film, and like from really successful high budget films that really put Keanu Reeves on the map, this was an odd choice in regard. I guess maybe he wanted to do something a little different and like the sci-fi concept, and maybe the script sounded a little better than it turned out to be, I'm not sure. It's just definitely an odd choice for someone like him. But I think he does well in the film, and it is unfortunately one of those films in Keanu Reeves' catalogue that's kind of long forgotten. It's a film no one really talks about, and a film that isn't really looked at or talked about much anymore than when it came out. The producers also forced, in a way, the director to hire Dolph Lundgren. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Dolph Lundgren at all. I think he's an odd choice for this film, and they pushed it so much that they had to create a whole new character for him, and I just don't think he's great in the film. Don't get me wrong, he had a couple of roles I liked, Rocky IV and Universal Soldier, but I'm not a huge fan of his. I just don't like the way he acts or portrays characters, and I felt he was an odd choice here, and he plays a street preacher who's kind of the assassin character. He's very religious focused, does sermons and talks about all these things, but he's also enhanced in many ways. And I feel that because Dolph Lundgren's in it, that's all I see. But if they had sort of an unknown or a different actor playing that role, it might have made it a much more interesting character and experience, a much more interesting viewing experience because of that. Teshi Kinto, he is a really great, solid actor, but a really great filmmaker as well. And having him in this was kind of interesting. The reason they cast him in, I think, was to speak to a much more wider market, especially with Japan. And in a lot of ways, he reminded me of the character in the Ghost in the Shell movie they made. Just they're very similar characters in a way. And I kind of like what he brings to it. He doesn't speak a lot of English, so he always speaks in Japanese, but he understands English. There's just a presence about him, something interesting that I like. He isn't used very effectively in the film, and in the Japanese cut of the movie, there's many more scenes of him in it, which make his character a bit more evident, involved in the story than they were originally. And I kind of think that's cool. Dina Myers was really great in it, I thought, playing Jane. She's a character that is a bodyguard, and she's sort of helping Johnny Mnemonic, and she's like a real sort of hero in the movie. And Dina Myers, I haven't really seen her do a lot of action, but I'm a fan of her, of Bats and Starship Troopers, and that's one of the Saw films she's in. I think it's like 2 or 3. I kind of like her, and she's cool as this character, and she's very effective in the movie, and I like that. Apparently in the short story, the Jane character doesn't exist. They created her for the movie. There's a character called Molly, and Molly was kind of like Johnny's love interest or friend, or helps him through his journey, and Johnny was the action hero. But they switched that when we got to the movie, changing the character from Molly to Jane, and Jane being the hero, actiony figure, where Johnny Mnemonic isn't so much. And that kind of works in a way in his favour. Like, Johnny's dressed in a suit that kind of is reminiscent of John Wick's suit that we see Keanu play years later. And he seems very slick and confident and capable, but not of everything. And then that's why I think Jane is much more of a capable character. And he wouldn't make it too far in the film without her, to tell you the truth, so she's kind of cool. It's a film that had been circulating for quite some time before they got to make it, especially in the first appeared in the 80s, like I said, and it wasn't until the 90s it got kind of picked up because of things changing. It got shelves for a long time, and then we got the film, and it just wasn't as good as it could have been. That's ultimately how I feel about the movie. It has some cool sequences in it. I liked the feel and look of this dystopian world that they create for the film. The visual effects are a little dated, but they're kind of still interesting and are very reminiscent of what they would do with The Matrix. In a lot of ways, this is a precursor to The Matrix. In that there are moments where Johnny is hooked into a digital world to do certain things, and we see that, and they are dated, where obviously in The Matrix he's hooked into that particular thing most of the movie. But just his performance and the concepts and ideas in this film, it just feels like we're taken a little bit from this movie and injected into The Matrix. And they talk about him being stoic and stuff and robotic. Well, that's how they were told him to act. He struggled with that, and a lot of people just felt that he was robotic. And you see that, and then they referred that into Matrix 2 Reloaded, when he does sort of play a similar version of Johnny Mnemonic in this robotic, stoic sort of way. In the film, there is this sort of syndrome or disease that's created that wasn't in the short story. It's created for the film, known as NAS, also called the Black Shakes, is caused by an overexposure to electromagnetic radiation from present technology devices, and is presented as a raging epidemic. And that's kind of where this pharmaceutical sort of mega corporations play into this movie, and really looks at what Johnny's carrying in his head and how that impacts and is involved in the whole overall arc and story of the film. There are some great moments in the film where Johnny first, we see him downloading something to his mind in this hotel room and bad guys come. There's this cool fight sequence in it. It shows a little bit of what he's capable of, and there's certain things he's better at than others. It isn't on the level of John Wick, of course, but he does handle his own in this sort of particular sequence. There are sequences through it where he's sort of traveling, trying to work everything out. Henry Rollins' character Spider's kind of interesting, and the relationship between them is really cool and reminded me of Escape of LA in a lot of ways, especially when Snake and the other character get kidnapped by this sort of crazed doctor. It kind of reminds me of that in little ways. The third act and the ending are really cool. There's a great sort of action sequence that takes place involving different aspects of certain characters in the movie and storylines, and that's kind of cool. I like that. And I do like the concepts and ideas in the film. I feel like this is something that could be re-looked at. I don't want to go into too much detail why I think it should be, as I want to do a video of particular movies and a variety of other things, talking about concepts and ideas of films that could be redone and re-looked at, and this is definitely one of them. I just wish we got a better movie than what we got. But apparently there is extended cuts. There's a Japanese edit of the film that kind of expands certain aspects to the movie. And there's also, apparently, I just found out today, there's a black and white version that came out in 2022. And I saw a bit of saw a few scenes online in a trailer, and it looks kind of cool. It reminds me of Sin City, and it would have been really interesting to see this film in black and white, but I don't know how well it would have done in black and white anyway, because people weren't probably a huge fan of black and white at that time. But I just feel like it's a version of the film that'd be really cool to see, because it is like black and white, but then when he goes into the digital world, it's in colour, but a much better colour than what we see in the movie. And I thought this was really cool. I definitely want to check this sort of version out. I don't think this film is going to be for everybody. People who like conceptual ideas and simple and effective sci-fi will get a kick out of this movie, but it's definitely not for everybody. I personally don't love it, but it is entertaining enough, and there is enough there that I can connect to and enjoy with the movie. And I'm glad that we have, the ability to still watch movies like this that are different and unique, and they're still out there. This is kind of another example where producers get involved in movies too much. I know they want to make a profit and they want to make something successful, and I completely understand that. But when you're messing with sort of people's visions and ideas and don't allow them to make the movies they want to make, then the films suffer, then the finances suffer, then the money they make on the movie suffers. And I just feel like this is an example of that, and just wish people would let people make certain films sometimes, just because they have a clear idea and vision of it, and if you don't let them do it, then it's going to suffer. And that's exactly what happened to this movie. And it's really sad when that happens. It's definitely one of the better bad films that came out in the 90s, and dealing with a particular interesting conceptual idea of a sort of genre film, and it is effective in parts. It's just overall not as good as it could be or could have been. Films like this often make me wonder what could have been, and we're just never going to see that version of it. And there are directors who release director's cuts, and they are a bit better than the original, but unless they're able to make the film they want to make, it just sort of suffers. I'd give Johnny Mnemonic 3 out of 5. It was entertaining enough. It has some great ideas and concepts that I had fun with. And I liked some of the performance and just the actiony aspect to it, and the world building that happens in the movie. I kind of appreciate as well. And like I mentioned, this film might not be for everyone, but it's worth checking out if you want something a little different. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom, follow my letterbox and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.